Central nervous system. Central nervous system consists of brain and spinal cord. It is enclosed by the meninges. Meninges has three layers: dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. The cerebral dura mater has two layers: endosteal layer, which is attached to bone, and meningeal layer attached to brain. Cerebral dura mater forms three internal folds which separate parts of brain, which are falx cerebri. It is a dorsal sickle-shaped fold of dura mater that lies between two hemispheres. This fold of dura mater is rostrally attached to crista gallia of ethmoid and caudally to internal occipital protuberance. Posteriorly, it continues with the transverse sheet of dura mater, the tentorium cerebelli, which separates cerebral hemisphere from cerebellum. On ventral aspect of brain is a transverse sheet of dura mater called diaphragma cellae, which has a central opening for stalk of pituitary gland and two lateral openings, one for the passage of internal carotid artery and other for passage of oculomotor nerve on both sides. Spinal dura mater comprises of meningeal layer and it is separated from periosteum of vertebrae called epidural space filled with fat. Arachnoid is a thin membrane lying internal to dura mater. This layer usually covers surface of brain including depressions. A thin worm-like membrane in interstitium of brain is pia mater. The arachnoid in certain regions of brain is separated from underlying pia mater by considerable spaces called cisterns. Major cistern is cisterna cerebellomedullaris. This cistern is also called as cisterna magna. Externally correspond to foramen magnum. This cistern lies caudal to cerebellum and dorsal to medulla oblongata. On ventral surface of brain, laterally piriform lobe is situated. Dorsolateral to that is a depression, namely cisterna fossa lateralis cerebri. On ventral surface of brain, two optic nerves cross over each other. This crossing over is called optic chiasma. Cistern lying in front of this optic chiasma is called cisterna chiasmaticus. There are two white bands called cerebral crura. Cistern lying between cerebral crura is called cisterna intercruralis. Elevation on ventral surface of brain behind peduncles is pons. Cistern lying behind pons is cisterna pontis. The brain is an enlarged rostral portion of CNS lying in cranial cavity, almost completely occupying it. Grossly, brain has three parts: cerebral hemispheres, cerebellum, and brainstem. Brainstem is that part which is visible after removing cerebral hemispheres and cerebellum. Anatomically, there are five divisions of brain, namely telencephalon. It comprises of cerebral hemispheres. Diencephalon comprises of epithalamus, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Mesencephalon consists of tectum and tegmentum. The tegmentum comprises of cerebral aqueduct and cerebral crura or peduncle ventrally. Metencephalon consists of dorsally cerebellum and ventrally pons. Behind the pons is myelencephalon, which become continuous caudally with spinal cord. Telencephalon comprises of two cerebral hemisphere and their connections. The cerebral hemisphere comprises of gray matter on outside and white matter on inside. The gray matter consists of surface cortex and corpus striatum or subcortical gray. Surface of cerebral hemisphere comprises of elevations called gyri, separated by one another by depression called sulci. In front are olfactory lobes which lie in ethmoidal fossa. Behind this is frontal lobe and comes in contact with frontal bone. Behind this is parietal lobe in contact with parietal bone. Behind this is occipital lobe in contact with occipital bone. On ventrolateral aspect is temporal lobe, which comes in contact with internal aspect of temporal bone. Major fissure, sulci and gyri of brain. The coronal fissure is long, directed craniocaudally, parallel to longitudinal fissure. Lateral to this is coronal gyrus. This is concerned with sensory functions. Cruciate fissure is a transverse fissure located in the middle of frontal lobe oriented transversely. The gyrus around this fissure is called pre-post cruciate gyri, concerned with motor functions. Behind the coronal gyrus is a transversely oriented unset sulcus, which becomes continuous with suprasylvian sulcus. Renal fissure is a distinct furrow on lower part of lateral face of hemisphere and is directed anteroposteriorly. The renal fissure separates rhinencephalon below from cerebral cortex above. The fissure of sylvius is on lateral aspect at the level of fossa lateralis and lodges middle cerebral artery. It passes upward for a short distance. The gyrus behind the sylvian fissure is post-sylvian gyrus, concerned with auditory functions. Callosal fissure is on medial surface of brain, seen in sagittal sections. This fissure is long and has corpus callosum below and gyrus fornicatus above. Gyrus fornicatus is a double gyrus lying dorsal to callosal fissure and dorsally related to callosomarginal fissure. The upper part is concerned with taste or gustatory sensations. Lower part is concerned with olfaction. callosum marginal fissure is extensive and well defined in medial face of the hemisphere. It lies parallel to gyrus fornicatus, curved like letter C in posterior part of the hemisphere. This posterior part extends on the tentorial surface of cerebral hemisphere. The gyrus around posterior part of this fissure on tentorial surface is called lingual gyrus, concerned with visual sensation. Corpus striatum or subcortical gray is gray basal nuclei situated rostral to thalamus and cerebral crura. Basal ganglia consists of caudate nucleus, lateral to which is internal capsule, lateral to which is lenticular nucleus, lateral to which is external capsule, lateral to which is claustrum. Amygdaloid body is a small oval mass of gray matter situated lateral to ventral horn of lateral ventricle, ventral to posterior part of lenticular nucleus concerned with rage and reward. Rhinencephalon is composed of olfactory lobes of brain cranially. Extending caudally from lobes are medial and lateral striae, between which is olfactory trigone. Behind the trigone is a large oval-shaped piriform lobe concerned with olfactory sensation. Corpus callosum is a transverse band of white fibers connecting the cerebral hemispheres and forms the floor of longitudinal fissure in this region. Corpus callosum forms the roof of lateral ventricle, seen on sagittal sections. It makes a part of commissural fibers. Corpus callosum comprises of centrally the body, anteriorly the genu, posteriorly the splenium. Fornix. Fornix is a median body below corpus callosum with which it is continuous at each end. It consists centrally the body and a pair of anterior pillar and a pair of posterior pillars. Posterior pillars are continuation of fimbriae from each side which arises from the alveus, the white matter covering the hippocampal gyri. Septum pellucidum is a thin median partition separating two lateral ventricles, dorsally attached to corpus callosum and ventrally to fornix. Hippocampus is a gyrus from each side which curves from deep face of piriform lobe around the thalamus and form posterior part of floor of lateral ventricle. The white matter covering the hippocampus gyri is alveus, which extends laterally as a fimbria. The fimbriae are continued forward as posterior pillar of fornix, which meet on either side to form the body of fornix. Hippocampus and caudate nucleus is separated from each other by choroid plexus of lateral ventricle. Lying deeply in the groove is a band of white matter called stria terminalis. Diencephalon extends from optic chiasma rostrally and mammillary body caudally. Diencephalon comprises of epithalamus forming pineal gland, thalamus and hypothalamus is a part of wall of third ventricle. Epithalamus comprises mainly of pineal body, which lie in front of rostral colliculus. Thalamus is a large oval body on dorsal surface of each cerebral peduncle, lying in front of rostral colliculi. It is the largest sensory nucleus. Geniculate body are medial and lateral. Medial geniculate body lies ventral, medial to lateral geniculate body. It is connected to caudal colliculus by brachium of caudal colliculus. It is concerned with acoustic sensation. Lateral geniculate body is located at caudo-dorsolateral angle of thalamus. It is connected to rostral colliculus of mesencephalon by brachium of rostral colliculus. It is concerned with visual reflex. Mesencephalon is a portion of brain in between diencephalon rostrally and pons caudally. The roof is formed by tectum, having paired rostral colliculi and paired caudal colliculi, together called corpora quadrigemina. Ventral to corpora quadrigemina is tegmentum, having substantia nigra. Ventral to that is cerebral peduncles. Cerebral peduncle are two thick fiber strands which enlarge rostral to pons and are separated by interpeduncular fossa. Mammillary bodies form oval elevation posterior to stalk of pituitary, lying medial to cerebral crura. The stalk of pituitary lies behind optic chiasma and in front of mammillary bodies and joins pituitary gland. Metencephalon constitutes cerebellum and pons. Pons is situated between cerebral peduncles rostrally and medulla oblongata caudally and has large fibrous protuberance on ventral aspect. From pons, dorsally arise middle cerebellar peduncle or brachium pontis, which joins cerebellum. The dorsal surface forms part of floor of rhomboid fossa. Cerebellum is irregularly shaped globular organ with largest diameter on transverse axis. It is separated from cerebral hemisphere by transverse fissure and tentorium cerebelli. It is grossly divided into central vermis and two lateral hemisphere. The cortex of cerebellum is a thin layer of gray substance and forms the extremely divided cerebellar surface. The medulla consists of white substance called corpora medullaris, which sends into peripheral larger laminae and smaller laminae branches resembling of tree, arbora vitae cerebelli. Myelencephalon consists of medulla oblongata, extends from pons to spinal cord. It is quadrilateral in outline. Ventral surface of medulla is divided on midline by ventral median fissure, which is continued as ventral median fissure of spinal cord. The pyramids are long narrow bodies on either side of anterior half of median fissure Lateral to pyramid is ventrolateral sulcus. On ventral surface of rostral portion is a transverse band of fibers called trapezoid body or corpus trapezoideum, which is crossed on either side of midline by the pyramids. The dorsal surface of medulla resembles the spinal cord in its caudal half. In a rostral half, it forms the rhomboid fossa, which is the floor of the fourth ventricle. Dorsal median septum of the spinal cord continues rostrally to end at the obex. Obex is rostral opening of central canal of spinal cord at fourth ventricle. Lateral to this septum is gracile nucleus. Lateral to it is a cuneate nucleus. The caudal cerebellar peduncle is found lateral to rhomboid fossa. Ventricles of brain. Ventricles are cavities in brain which are 4 in numbers. 2 lateral ventricles, third ventricle and fourth ventricle. Lateral ventricles, there are 2 in number. 1 in each half of cerebral hemisphere, separated by septum pellucidum. Anterior horn of lateral ventricle is entering into anterior part of cerebral hemisphere into olfactory bulb. The posterior horn is directed laterally, backwards, turned downward and forward to end in piriform lobe. Roof of lateral ventricle is formed by corpus callosum. Floor is formed by caudate nucleus rostrally and hippocampus caudally. Interventricular foramen of Monro is the communication between lateral and third ventricle, located between fornix and anterodorsal part of the thalamus. Third ventricle is a narrow circular cavity nearly surrounding area around thalami. Third ventricle has pineal, optic and infundibular recesses. Third ventricle communicates with fourth ventricle through foramen of aqueduct, also called Sylvian aqueduct. Course of this aqueduct lies between colliculi dorsally and cerebral peduncles ventrally and joins cavity of fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle is a large cavity on the dorsal surface of brainstem. The posterior end opens into central canal of spinal cord and anterior end communicates with third ventricle through aqueduct of Sylvius. The floor is formed by rhomboid fossa. The central part of roof is formed by cerebellum. Anterior medullary velum is a white matter thin membrane forming the anterior part of the roof. Posterior roof is formed by posterior medullary velum. Cerebellum is attached to brainstem by 3 cerebellar peduncles. The rostral cerebellar peduncle or brachium conjunctivum attaches cerebellum to caudal colliculi. Middle cerebellar peduncle or brachium pontis attaches cerebellum to pons. And posterior cerebellar peduncles or restiform body attaches cerebellum to medulla oblongata.